hope you all had a really nice lunch. Welcome to my talk. More feedback, quantity becomes quality. It's really easy to mix those two words up. Happens really often in this talk. This is a talk that has been on my mind for many, many years. There's often this false dichotomy that you can either do something well or you can do a lot of it, and I think it's just completely false. And it's absolutely possible to do both. So the main goal of this talk is to actually have you start thinking about how you can increase the amount of feedback that you get as well as what you give, so you can improve your skills and the skills of those around you. As Hannah said, my name is Kyle. I am based out of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I've been working in the Ruby world for over 15 years now. I've worked with some really, really large, really complex code bases and worked with a lot of different engineers. But I've stayed in the Ruby world because I love the Ruby community. And you all being here, you are a great example of that community. And I don't foresee myself ever leaving the Ruby community until I'm just done work entirely. I'm also a principal software engineer at AHA. And I've been there for over 4 years now, and it's been one of the best workplaces that I have been a part of. They provide a suite of tools that help other companies build what's really important to them. But the more important side for me is that they have a culture that is one of the best cultures that I have been a part of, and they have a series of values that they refer to as TRM, which is the responsive method, which gives us all a bunch of shared values we can all agree on, embody, and move quickly independently. So moving on to the beginning of this talk, I like to normally start with a story. And I knew the perfect story leading into this talk, and I've known it for many years. And this story comes from a book called Art and Fear by David Bales and Ted Orland. And this is a book about making art, just ordinary art. But in particular, it gets into some of the reasons why art doesn't get made and the difficulties that cause artists to give up. And I found this story really early in my career, and it really stuck with me. So often when junior or even senior engineers come and ask me for advice, the story from this book is one that I often want to tell them. And the story goes like this. There's a ceramics teacher who wanted to run an experiment with his class. And the ceramics teacher announced on opening day that he's going to divide the class into 2 groups. All of those on the left side of the studio, he would say, you're going to be graded solely on the quantity of work you produce. And all those on the right are going to be solely graded on the quality. And the procedure was simple. On the final day of class, he would bring in his bathroom scales and weigh the work. And if the quantity group provided 50 pounds of pots, they would get an A, 40 pounds a B, and so on. And those being graded on quality, however, only needed to do 1 pot, albeit a perfect one, and they would get an A in the class. And then come grading time, a curious fact emerged. All of the work of the highest quality was all produced by the group graded for quantity. It seems that the quantity group was just busy churning out piles of work, learning from their mistakes, and the quality group had sat theorizing about perfection. And in the end, they had little more to show for their efforts than grandiose theories and a pile of dead clay. So to sum up the story in a single sentence, perfect is the enemy of good. And this is such a good statement and is so true. And if you think good work is synonymous with perfect work, you're headed for big trouble. And when we think about this through the lens of software engineering, how many people have done it themselves or seen it from others that the code that they work on just does not get feedback until it's completely perfect and done? You start a project, you work on it for a month before someone even looks at it. Have you ever seen that happen? There is this belief that to be an excellent coder, you need to always be doing things flawlessly. And some people even feel imposter syndrome that they shouldn't even be coding if they're not doing things perfectly. The book continues to say that it's much more plausible to bring this counter principle, that imperfection is not only a common ingredient for art, but it's an essential ingredient. And this absolutely applies to software engineering too. I really like some of the statements from this book, Art and Fear. They say, without imperfection, the pattern is predictable. You see the error in what you could do, you steer yourself towards what you can imagine you can do perfectly, and you cling ever more tightly to what you already know and what you already can do, and you stay away from risk and exploration. And that means that you end up finding reasons to procrastinate. So to not work is to not make mistakes, and then sooner or later you can't do what you're trying to do, and you quit. And it's a perfect death spiral. You misdirect your work, you stall, you quit. This was always something that really stuck with me reading this story. And you may have heard something saying that you need 10,000 hours in order to master a skill. This is a rule that was also popularized by Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers. And this rule basically suggests that in order to reach a high level of expertise, you'll need roughly 10,000 hours of practice. And while this statement isn't really true, but it does have some truth behind it. Not all time that you spend on something is created equal. For instance, if you have 3 hours with an expert giving you direct feedback, that may go farther than just 3 hours of self-exploration. So in order to make this time really count, you need to incorporate some sort of learning cycle. And it usually looks something like this. Sometimes they have different verbs. You need to set some kind of experiment or goal for yourself. Then you do something to gather experience and feedback. It's great when there is objective means of gathering that feedback, but you can provide feedback for yourself. You can have colleagues provide feedback. You might even be able to leverage AI in this new world to provide yourself feedback. And then you can reflect on that feedback. Think about it. Why did I do these things that I did? And then should I do things differently? And if you do decide that things should be done differently, you conceptualize. How can I do this thing differently? And then you repeat. And this feels very rigid, but likely you're doing this already unconsciously, as this is one of the key ways that we learn. And it's a nice way to formally express the way we learn about topics. But this is a style of practice known as deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is a special type of practice that is both purposeful and systematic. So while regular practice might be mindless repetitions, deliberate practice might be focusing your attention on one particular skill with the goal of trying to improve that skill. This has even been the focus of studies. There was a study done in 2010 about deliberate practice, in which they refer to as deliberate play, when it came to basketball. For them, they wanted to measure a couple different metrics they refer to as tactical game intelligence and tactical creativity. And they grabbed a group of 22 players who were assessed before and after a big 18-lesson intervention plan. And these people had no previous competitive sport experience and only some experience with some leisure sports. And they carved this group into two groups, one for deliberate training and the other for traditional structured game training. And the way they broke this down is they divided the amount of time they spent with each group into 4 categories. The first being conversations they had with a coach, the second being structured game forms, such as just playing a game of basketball or doing repetitive drills such as dribbling, the third being just competitions, and the final being this unstructured game form. And this is the important category. In this category, rather than playing like a regular game, they would play these unstructured short scenarios, such as what would happen in a one-on-one or a 2v2. But then they would also change the scenarios. What would happen if we played with numerical superiority or inferiority, like a 3-on-1 or a 4-on-3? Or they would put people into a group and put restrictions on them, saying like, you can join and you can pass, but you can't shoot or score. And this last one was really important because it was a number of short drills that the people would do and immediately get feedback of whether or not what went good, what went bad, and how to change it. And so the way the groups were split up into the time that they spent playing was, the placebo group spent about 19% with the coaches, about 42 in structured games, 15 in competitions, 23 in unstructured games. But with the deliberate practice group, they it looked a little bit like this, where they spent about the same amount of time in coaches and competitions, but more than double the amount of time was in this like unstructured things that is not quite the basketball game. And then they took footage of this training before and after and provided it to independent experts for evaluation, and they were given a specific score. Now, this raw score isn't too relevant, but it's the relative scores that are important. In the placebo group, in terms of tactical intelligence, they started with a score of 4.7 and improved after 18 sessions to about 4.67. And they saw a similar improvement in this tactical creativity category as well. But when they compared this to the deliberate play group, they saw that the increase in the player's skill in the same time period was significantly higher, a jump from 4.39 to a score of 6.12. And similarly, we saw a bigger jump in terms of the other category as well. So this study is important even to us. We are doing software engineering, not basketball. But what this study really showed is that when we do something where we get lots of feedback, that is how we improve our skills. And being able to reflect on what went well or what isn't is one of the most important parts to growing your skills. So we've talked about art, and then we've talked a little bit about basketball. So let's actually now talk a little bit more about software engineering. And software engineering is a lot more like art than it is like basketball. If I asked you all what does quality code look like, I would imagine I'd get a whole bunch of different answers from you. There'd probably be overlap, but a whole bunch of different ones. Maybe quality code could be expressed as code that's effective, reliable, maintainable, secure, clean, or any combination of verbs. There are many other ways to describe it too, and a lot of it is going to be subjective to the context of the code. What quality code looks like in a legacy code system might be different than what quality code looks like in a startup. At one of my previous jobs, before I really leaned harder into being an individual contributor, I was in management, and I had the opportunity to manage about 30 developers. And I found this experience a little bit stressful, but I did see a lot of similar patterns across a lot of the engineers as they grew in their career. And at the time, I had mapped it out something that looked like this. So initially, I'd be looking in terms of the engineer in their terms of the career. And when they began, they couldn't write good code. They couldn't write a lot of code. And this is okay. This was actually what I expect of someone in a junior position. We're teaching them how to do things. And then there was this really interesting divide that I saw as developers gained experience. Some developers really wanted perfection. And they would pick up a task just a little bit outside their comfort zone, and it would take them a while to get it fully working. And often it would work fairly well, but it would take them a long time to do it. And then there was another group of developers who would just focus on getting pull request after pull request up as fast as possible. And the team would review it, and sometimes there would be tons of comments on the code. And they might actually have to like throw away all of their code that they worked on and try again. And they would. And eventually we would get into a place it was exactly what we needed and we could ship it. And then the goal of these two groups would be eventually, can we do them both at the same time? And this was a really decent initial view of things, but when I started trying to understand this pattern further, I started noticing something a little bit different. So when I started digging into people's career paths, things started to look a little bit more like this. If we were measuring them in terms of time, those who started on their path to improve their quantity of work got to the next stage of their career much faster. And this is because they would be getting constant feedback. Every day, they would be producing something, and someone would provide feedback on it. Maybe it was not complete, but someone would be providing feedback on it. If it was good, they continued in that direction. And if it wasn't, they would pivot. And it would be okay because they only spent a little bit of time working on it. They didn't have a huge amount of work to throw away. Members of the other group, though, would often disappear for a few days or a week, and then they would surface to gather feedback only when they thought it was perfect, when it was done. And there was probably less comments overall, less pivoting, But this group ended up with a fraction of the feedback that the other group would get, and it would take them much longer to improve. Further, the group that I kind of classified into this quantity section, they would also raise flags when they got stuck, because they wanted to be constantly producing work so that they can get that feedback. So when they hit the wall and they got stuck, they would start talking and ask for help. And yes, there are occasions where I would want them to try harder, try a little bit longer before asking for help, but overall, I really liked this practice. I could even give them that feedback of being like, try a little bit longer. But on the other side, the quality group, I had some colleagues that would just disappear. And they would say, oh, I'm still working on this, I'm stuck, but I'll figure it out. And the next day they would say, I'm still working on it, I'm a little bit stuck. And they just kept wanting to push completely independently. And then sometimes that means that they would disappear for a long time before they really asked for help and started getting feedback from those around them. So imagine yourself now. You've been working in Ruby for some period of time. If I gave you a simple category like this and asked, how good are you at coding? How would you rank yourself? Maybe you would say that you can write code, good code, you write a lot of code. You know what? I would 100% believe you. This is really hard to break this down even further. So it's nice to move away from some sort of binary quantity or quality and give yourself some sort of ranking for yourself, a little self-evaluation. Could you rank yourself in terms of coding out of 10? Are you a 9 out of 10? And this is a really interesting effect. There's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I hear some people laughing. So they already know this. But this is a study that was done where they gave a bunch of people an exam of 45 questions. And they asked them, how well do you think you did? And they rated themselves something like this, from about 32 to about 40-ish. And then when it came to the actual scores, all except for the people who did very good, the participants always tended to overestimate themselves and their own performances. So it's really easy for us to overestimate our ability to do something. Are you above average? Because if all of you are above average, that's not how averages work. So we really need to be careful when we are performing these kind of self-assessments. And one way to get away from this of overestimating yourself is to continually break down the categories into smaller categories. What would you rank yourself in terms of back-end or front-end or database skills? Maybe you're really good at one of those and less good at another. Or you could move to just classifying areas of software engineering in general. You know, pretty much every engineer I know has to perform code reviews. They have to get up to speed in new areas quickly, debug problems. Maybe you would rate yourself something like this, and you can start identifying that maybe your weakness is getting up to speed in new areas. Figuring out this kind of breakdown for yourself is really important to deliberate practice and growing your skills, because if you don't know what specific skill you are weak at, it is much harder to be deliberate at making yourself better at that. So you could look at a generic score and say, I want to be a better coder, but it's too broad of a statement. If you want to be doing some deliberate practice to become better, to be more skilled, you'll need to target things. So the first step in a deliberate practice plan is to figure out what is the area you want to focus on. And once you know that area, it's time to start crafting what a practice plan looks like. And this is kind of the point where everything starts being very unique to the individual. I can talk through some high-level skills and some examples to give you something to start thinking about, but it's important to start thinking about this for yourself and those around you of how can you help them. It will require a little bit of self-reflection, though. So I'll also talk afterwards about some things that I do specifically for myself. If you would like to adopt those, great. If you think that they're dumb, that's okay. They work well for me. But the really important thing here is you don't need to fully craft a plan by yourself. Since the goal is to gather feedback, it makes perfect sense to try to build a plan as a group, and so that way the feedback that is being given or received makes sense. So for the purpose of this talk, let's look at code reviews as an example, because literally outside of writing code, it's probably one of the most important skills as a software engineer. It's both a way to make other people better, because you are providing them feedback, but it's also a good way to improve yourself, because you can review your own code and look through it through the lens of what would I comment on someone else's, and make those changes and learn what you would need to do. And to start with that, you need to figure out what is a good code review. There's a couple metrics that jump to mind. How fast can you review it? Does the code have any errors after deploy? Are your comments clear? Do you understand the code? You can look at Google's code review guideline online, which they open for everybody. And they outline what makes a good code review, but it's also a very long document with multiple pages. So remember what I said earlier, that if you are being too generic, it's difficult to focus. So even something like this is too generic for a particular skill. We have to be a little bit more specific. So instead of focusing on, can we be good at all code reviews, we can focus on a specific metric, such as how fast can you review code? And Google's guide has a section on this, and I think it does a fantastic job of summarizing why it is important. And it's something I agree with, and I encourage you all to read it, but they give a good metric. Ideally, a code review should be done shortly after it comes in, and it should take you a maximum of 1 business day to respond to any code review. And I know people who do this easily, and I know people who it's a struggle to get them to review code within a week. This is a good metric for them. So using code review speed as our focus, let's come back to our learning cycle. We can start with a goal and a plan. And remember, this does not need to be complicated, and in fact, it shouldn't. Just start with a simple goal. Maybe your goal says that you're going to review all pull requests within 4 business hours. That's a pretty fast turnaround time, and that's a good place to start. And then you can make a simple plan. Maybe your plan looks like this. You're going to review code at the beginning of the day, maybe before your lunch, and then before you end the day. That seems like a good place to start. So now you move to try to gather experience and feedback. And you want to be gathering the feedback constantly. The more feedback that you can get, the easier it is to refine your process. So you could build a way to extract this data from GitHub and do something complicated. But since the goal is also to gather as much feedback as you can also just note it at the end of every pull request that you look at. So for instance, a pull request maybe comes in on April 22nd, and then you reviewed it the following day, within a minute of 1 business day. So not quite the 4 hours you thought, but still within 1 business day. So now you have a little bit of feedback already. Now you can reflect on this. Why didn't you hit your goal? Maybe this was just a bad example. That's fine, that happens sometimes. So maybe if this is the case, you might need to gather more feedback. But maybe you could also conclude that maybe you're too tired at the end of the day. You're just too mentally exhausted to review it before you wrap up. Well, now you know a little bit of that feedback. Think about how you could do it differently. If it was an outlier, maybe you are just going to wait for a little bit more information. That's your plan. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. Maybe before you start doing code reviews, you need to take a short break so that you refresh yourself, so that when you come back to reviewing code, you can think through it a little bit better. And then you continue. This is a nice little plan. Oh, sorry. There we go. Got to do this again. This is a nice little plan that would let you gather your own feedback rather than solely relying on the feedback of others. Remember, though, the lesson from the beginning of the talk. While it's important to have this cycle and learn, do not try to make this part perfect. Just make a plan, gather what you can, and then do as much as you can with it and just keep repeating. The quantity that you go through this will become the quality of your code. And then it's just a matter of how often are you going through this cycle. You do something, you gather feedback on it, you reflect on it, and then you think about how can you do it differently. It is much easier to progress when you're taking several smaller steps than trying to take a big one. And the feedback part of this is the most important part. In this code review example, the feedback is an objective thing, time. How long did it take you? But there are many forms this feedback could take in any skill. This could be something that you are objectively measuring, like time. But for other skills, this could be feedback that you're providing to yourself. Self-evaluation of your own tasks is really important. Maybe you're working to write clearer comments. So you look at some comments like out of context and say, like, is this clear? If I read this, would I understand this? It could also be from your colleagues or supervisors. If you're trying to write clear comments, you can go talk to them, get some feedback from them. Did you understand this? Was there anything that's unclear? Get anything that you need from them to help you understand of, are you hitting your goals that you want? Are you improving? And I thought I would kind of finish this talk by talking about some notes about the things that I do in my routines that really help me gather some feedback and improve, and might be useful to some of you to take away as terms of your learning plans. So let's talk a little bit about code reviews. One of the things that I find incredibly useful is having 2 people review every single pull request. I'm basically doubling the amount of required reviewers. But I think this isn't really important. One, it means that the writer has more people giving them feedback, which is only just a plus. But it also means that I have someone else on every pull request who is able to provide me feedback on how well I am reviewing code. So if someone sees something that I don't, I have an immediate opportunity to say, why did I miss that? What did they know that I don't? And I can have a conversation with them. It also makes me much more comfortable jumping into code to review it that I'm not an expert into it, that I might just be looking at for the first time, because there may be an expert also reviewing the pull request. I really like to know how long it takes me to review code. I like this goal of reviewing all pull requests within 4 business hours is something that actually I strive for. I want to have that happen all the time, because if someone provides me a pull request, I'm blocking them by not reviewing them, and they have to do something else, work on a lot of things concurrently, or just wait. So I want to provide them immediate feedback, or at least tell them exactly when I'm going to get to it in case I am busy. I also like to look for errors of the code that's been merged, the things that I've reviewed. So whenever there is, like, I get notified when pull requests get merged, so I watch. And if I see an error that popped up, it actually gives me an immediate way to say, why did I let this through? And not the way to like create a culture of blame, but it's a way to reflect on a mistake that happened. Maybe there was no way to catch it, but maybe there was. And I have a moment to actually look at that and say, how did this happen? But there's also other skills. I like debugging a lot. So for instance, for debugging, I like to pick up a bug or task and estimate how long do I think this is going to take. Sometimes it's like, okay, this is going to take a day, and it takes an hour. Why was I wrong? Why did I overestimate that? I'm not reporting this to anyone. This is just internal to myself. Or if I think this is going to take like a couple minutes to fix and it takes most of a day, why? And just answer that question for me, because often I will learn something new by asking myself that question. Maybe it's about the area of the code that I'm working in. Maybe this area is really complex, doesn't have great documentation, I don't know how to navigate it. That's actually good feedback. Now we can do something with that. I like to tackle bugs every single day. I have a process where the beginning of every day, if I can, I carve out 30 to 45 minutes to just tackle something new. This means that almost every day I get a pull request up and merged. That's kind of nice. I like feeling that's like a win. It also means that I'm constantly exposed to new areas of the code base. And so when I need to build something that happens to touch it, I've probably already touched it a few times, and it takes me much less time to get going. And it was actually really easy to justify this to the business because I'm fixing bugs for the customer. So there's immediate customer impact, and then you just get happier customers from this. And then when it comes to actually debugging, just like the learning system, I follow it like an observation, hypothesis, experiment flow where I think, what are the facts that I currently know? What could possibly happen? Can I find the cause? And I just continue going through this experiment until I can figure out the bug. And I find that it makes it really easy to debug almost any problem. And in fact, I really, really love debugging. I have a whole other talk specifically on debugging that I gave out in RubyConf in 2021 in Denver. This is freely available on YouTube, so if you are interested, you can also go check that out, where you'll see this like learning cycle where I'm talking about like how do you go through this hypothesis experiment. But if you really want to become a better engineer, a better manager, a better anything, this is one of the best ways to do it. Focus on getting as much feedback as possible. The feedback can be from any source, AI, yourself, colleagues, and then iterate on that feedback as much as you can. The quantity of that feedback is going to determine the quality of your expertise. So thank you for listening to my talk today. If you do have any thoughts or questions, please let me know afterwards. I'm always happy to talk about this.